what you guys like, what I like, and also that there are actually people who like Generation 5. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't hate Generation 5, but it is my least favorite for reasons that we'll be going into throughout this video. And I'm not completely biased. Generation 5 did do a lot of good, as does every other gen, and of course this is a pros and cons, where I'll be talking about the good and the bad. But as a lot of you can probably already tell, most of my feelings towards Generation 5 are mostly negative. But again, you'll see exactly why, well, towards the end. So, with that said, this is the video that inspired the entire series, and welcome to the Silver League Top 5 Pros and Cons of Generation 5. Pro number 5. Fully animated sprites. Now this is a very minor compliment, I mean very minor. I almost didn't want to put it on the list, but then I had to think back to when Generation 5 first debuted. When we saw these fully animated sprites, everyone flipped out. It was so cool, it added so much more personality to these Pokemon. Because for about 15 years, all we had was a static still image, and then we got used to 3 frames of animation. That was all we ever got back in the day. But with fully animated sprites, battles on YouTube were a lot more interesting because they weren't just a static image with attack animations being thrown at each other and sped up to like techno music or narration or something. It just made battles a lot more interesting to look at, made everything feel a lot more alive, VGCs were better to watch. It made things better. It was a minor touch, but it just made things a lot better, and with Black and White 2, things got even better when finally the trainer sprites would have animations. Not just the 3 still shots that we got, I mean like actual animations. Yeah, it stopped and it would become a still frame, but it was still cool that we got all this animation and it really pushed the limit of sprite work on, well, the DS. And as a spriter, I really appreciate all the resources I got from both of these games. Pro number 4. TMs no longer expire. Oh, thank God. Okay, did we really need to wait 15 years for this feature? This was such a glorious and wonderful thing. And I mean that sincerely. Thank you so much for making TMs not expire, because that was literally the biggest thing we would mass clone, duplicate, and basically use cheating devices for. Not me. Again, I went to Cerebi and I fished for all the TMs. So, from a guy who plays legitimately, thank you so much. Pro number 3. The Pokédex was completely original. Say what you will about the Unova Dex, and trust me, I got a thing or two to say about it. But the fact that it gave us 156 brand new Pokemon that are in no way related to any Pokemon from previous generations, even though some of them should be related, the fact that they gave us a completely brand new Pokédex, it's just amazing, and it's something I think a lot of people still take for granted. Pokemon Black and White was supposed to essentially serve as a reboot for the entire franchise, and with that, Game Freak's goal was to recreate that experience of Red and Blue, or frankly any player's first Pokemon game, where they're just thrown into a new world that they're completely unfamiliar with, and every encounter is a genuine surprise because it's their first time seeing this Pokemon. This was a really daring move on Game Freak's part, and kind of endearing, because they were stripping away all nostalgia so that all generations of Pokemon fans could be united in this one single experience of discovering these Pokemon in this new world all together at the exact same time, without any kind of judgment or opinion beforehand. Whether or not it worked, the fact that Game Freak did this is something I have to commend them for, because frankly, I don't think we're gonna ever see them do something like this ever again. Based on how Generation 5 turned out, I don't know. I think Generation 6 was probably one of their most successful attempts at a reboot, and it really pines to nostalgia. Pro number 2. Black and White 2. Now this is going to sound very strange, But on a technical level, Pokemon Black and White 2 is actually my favorite Pokemon game in the core series to play. Emphasis on the word play. And basically the reason for this is because, well, it had everything. It had animated Pokemon sprites, animated trainer sprites, an expanded map that actually made me like the Unova region's layout, an adventure that was a ton of fun with a rather intriguing revenge-driven storyline, Pokestar Studios, which was essentially a very weird take on battle puzzles, the Joint Avenue, which honestly was probably one of the smartest additions they could ever come up with to put in a Generation 5 game. And then there was the Pokemon World Tournament. Easily one of my favorite gimmicks they have ever thrown in one of these games. Like, seriously, the fact that you could battle all the gym leaders from all the generations, all the champions, it was just really, really, really cool, and I just loved that feature so much. That was something I loved going back to again and again and again. It had solid music, solid visuals, and for those who really wanted it, you could catch an Eevee basically at the start of the game. So with that said, it's easily my favorite Pokemon game to play. Not necessarily my favorite, but with all the bonus content thrown in, it's easily the best core Pokemon game to play if you just want a straight up Pokemon experience that's not your nostalgic favorite. Oh yeah, and this was also the gen that upgraded Everstone to have a 100% chance of passing down the nature of the parent holding it. So, good job there. And the number 1 pro of Generation 5 is... Hidden Abilities, Eviolite, and overdue changes to old moves and abilities. The great thing about Hidden Abilities is that it was just a very minor addition to what a Pokemon already had, but it allowed a Pokemon to have unheard of potential all because of this minor addition. Pokemon like Espeon got a huge boost just because of its ability. Slowbro basically cemented itself as one of the ultimate walls and became a part of the infamous Amoonguss and Slowbro core. While Pokemon like Blaziken would just get flat out banned because of their hidden abilities, and suspiciously Pokemon like Superior with potentially game-breaking abilities have never had theirs released. Well, Eviolite was an item that would boost the defense and special defense of a Pokemon who wasn't fully evolved. This allowed Pokemon like Porygon 2 to completely get a new lease on life and just shine as amazing Pokemon who can completely stand on their own. Thankfully, Porygon 2 and Porygon Z competitively are completely different Pokemon. On the flip side, Dusknoir would actually end up being overshadowed by its pre-evolution Dusclops, who, thanks to Eviolite, can technically be the better Pokemon between the two, which is kinda crazy. Stuck in the middle would be Chansey, who would forever be debated whether or not it's actually better than its evolution Blissey. Personally, you can take either or. It depends on the kind of moveset you're working with and if you're working under item clause. And then there were completely gimmicky Pokemon like Murkrow, who could actually work as a really good mean-look prankster Pokemon, who, thanks to Eviolite, can now take hits. That's the main thing that Eviolite did. It allowed these Pokemon to basically take better hits and make them competitively viable as a result, which is kind of surprising to consider how big a difference being able to take a hit would make for a Pokemon. And possibly the biggest surprise of all were all the changes that Game Freak did to a lot of old abilities and moves. Sturdy became basically a free Focus Sash, which was just amazing. The effect of Lightning Rod got buffed, Explosion got a debuff, Giga Drain finally became a good move, and Drain Punch got more PP, kind of justifying its okay attack power with the bonus that it can now actually be used more. These are just a few examples of the many changes that were made to a lot of Pokemon that really improved a ton of them. Even Pokemon who were already good got even better with some of the abilities they had, like Salamence at the time getting Moxie was a huge bonus for it. All of this continued something that I really liked about Generation 4, and now is the idea of making old Pokemon who were basically becoming outclassed by newer Pokemon good again by just doing minor changes, whether it's an evolution or giving them a new ability or buffing their current abilities and current moves. All of this would go towards making a better, stronger, more balanced metagame. All of this, combined with fully animated sprites, TMs that no longer expire, 156 new Pokemon to capture, seasons, Dream World, and the promise of doing things new and different. We were hyped up. We were excited. We were looking forward to this generation because Generation 4 was so perfect. They just got everything right, and we were excited and ready to move on. And here's how they screwed up. Con number 5. Way too many Pokemon on the Pokédex were homages. Alright, so remember what I said about them wanting to recreate the feeling of Red and Blue? Yeah, I think Game Freak took that a bit too literally, because even though we got a completely original Pokédex with no old Pokemon, potentially half the Pokédex feels like they were just a straight up homage to Gen 1 in particular, and even some other gens. Now I'm not going to be hating on Game Freak for giving us the Pokemon that are basically traditions and the ones we get every gen. So not counting the starters, the regional rodent, the regional cat, the regional bird, and the regional dragon, plus the 2 sets of fossils, and the Pikachu clone, that's 24 Pokemon, already taken out of 156 just because they're traditions. And so right now, I'm going to go through every Pokemon in the Unova Dex and point out any of the Pokemon that are basically a straight up homage to Gen 1. And then I'll go through the other gens really quickly because those are a lot more sparse. 2-stage evolution Psychic type who's based on sleep and dreams. 2-stage evolution single type horse Pokemon whose best stat is attack and speed and is also incredibly frail. Generic rock type Pokemon found in every bloody cave who also has 3 stages of evolution and needs a trade to get its final form. Generic bat Pokemon found in every bloody cave. 2-stage evolution ground type Pokemon who's based around digging and have virtually the same moveset and abilities. One-off normal type Pokemon with a ton of HP that gives a lot of experience and is found in every Pokemon Center in the anime. 3-stage evolution fighting type who also requires trade evolution to get its final form. I mean, really? 3-stage water type Pokemon based on a toad that also starts out as a tadpole. Except this one has a really disturbing face. Pair of one-off fighting types who are based on different forms of martial arts. Opposing 3-stage evolution bug type Pokemon that can be caught early game, complete with Cocoon State in the middle. Generic fish Pokemon found everywhere in the game. But why doesn't this one evolve? Ground type Pokemon based on an animal found in Africa who starts out as a quadruped and ends up being a biped when it evolves, and coincidentally completely changes color when it reaches its final stage in evolution. One-off underrated grass-type Pokemon. 2-stage evolution crustacean-based Pokemon. 2-stage poison-type literally based on garbage. Adorable normal-type Pokemon that knows Sing and needs an evolution stone to get its final form. 3-stage evolution psychic-type. But this was version exclusive, so multiply that by 2. Common water-type duck Pokemon complete with disappointing evolution. 2-stage poison type based on mushrooms. 2-stage evolution jellyfish Pokemon. 3-stage evolution steel type based on an inanimate object coming to life whose evolution involves more copies of itself coming together to form a new Pokemon. Super powerful 3-stage ghost type Pokemon who requires something special to access its final evolutionary form. Out of place 2-stage evolution ice type Pokemon. Seriously, what's a Beartic doing in not New York City? And what was Dewgong doing in the middle of Kanto? Normal type bovine Pokemon. That really should have been a Tauros evolution. And then there's the special selection of non-Gen 1 homages, which include grass type Pokemon based on vegetation that also requires a Sunstone to access its female dancer inspired evolution. 2-stage canine-esque Pokemon who was basically used as promotional material before their gen came out. And of course, the not Love Disc evolution. That's 62 Pokemon that are arguably a homage to something from Gen 1 or a previous generation. Counting the Pokemon that are traditions, that total goes up to 86. 86 Pokemon out of 156 are essentially a homage to another Pokemon. That's more than half if you count the traditions. Just less than half if you don't. Do you see what I mean? Can I move on without getting a lot of hate mail? No? Maybe? Con number 4. Team Plasma was a bunch of hypocrites. Okay, I gotta give them a bit of credit. The concept for Team Plasma was different. But the problem is, in a core Pokemon game, where most of your gameplay is Pokemon battles, having a villain team that wants to liberate Pokemon, at least on the surface, kinda comes off as hypocritical right from the start, because, well, they kind of have to use Pokemon because that's part of the gameplay.